A stern warning tonight from the defense secretary. Even though the companies are targeting military members with discounts and other incentives, stay away from these DNA kits because they could be putting you and the country at risk.
A growing number of companies like 23andMe and Ancestry sell these kits that can profile consumers' DNA just by analyzing their saliva. They are hugely popular but pose a risk for military members. The Defense Department saying the kits are not FDA approved and cannot be fully trusted. The Defense Secretary sent a warning letter to military members about these kits, saying there is growing concern that the companies are using the data for questionable purposes, including mass surveillance and the ability to track individuals without their authorization or awareness.
So are these DNA kits bad for everyone? Absolutely not. But the DoD says they do pose more risk to soldiers because soldiers must follow specific guidelines when disclosing medical information. Want to learn more? Check out our website, WUSA9.com. Delia Gonsalves, WUSA 9.